Good evening and welcome to Crossroads. The United States is preparing for a worst-case scenario in the Israel-Hamas war. This includes plans to evacuate more than 600,000 U.S. citizens from Israel and Lebanon, and the deployment of additional weapon systems to the Middle East that can, intercept ballistic missiles. It's also now moving additional warships to the region, and this is following a recent escalation from Iran. I mentioned last week on this show that several U.S. military bases were attacked. This included rocket and drone attacks in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. And now it turns out that Iran was behind at least some of these, although I should note they were not too serious. The White House has now declared, though, that Iran is actively facilitating rocket and drone attacks on U.S. military bases, at least in Iraq and Syria. President Joe Biden cut a recent press conference short as he was informed of the news. Biden was rushed into the Situation Room, and he only briefly told reporters that, "I apologize, I have to go to the Situation Room for another issue I have to deal with." It turned out that the attacks we mentioned were taking place last week have since escalated. On Monday morning, U.S. forces were attacked a second time at the Al-Tan base in Syria. They were targeted by 2 drones, although no injuries were reported. I mentioned last week as well that the groups behind some of the attacks are tied to Iran. That was known. It was suspected they were coming from Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen. At the time, though, it wasn't confirmed which groups the attacks in Syria and Iraq were coming from. But that's now changing. The White House declared on Monday that it believes the terrorist attacks are being supported directly by the Iranian government and by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard, the IRGC. White House spokesman John Kirby said, "We know that Iran is closely monitoring these events and in some cases actively facilitating these attacks."
Iran is closely monitoring these events and in some cases actively facilitating these attacks and spurring on others who may want to exploit the conflict for their own good or for that of Iran.
He added that they're aware that Iran is trying to maintain a degree of plausible deniability, but he noted, "We also are not going to allow any threat to our interests in the region to go unchallenged." Now, on Saturday, the United States also declared it was sending additional ballistic missile defense systems to the Middle East. The United States is sending a Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD system, along with additional Patriot air defense missile system battalions to the region. Now, these systems are able to intercept ballistic missiles, which can carry chemical or biological munitions, as well as nuclear warheads. And this could really just be the beginning. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said in a statement that following detailed discussions with President Joe Biden on recent escalations by Iran and its proxy forces across the Middle East region, today, I directed a series of additional steps to further strengthen the Department of Defense's posture in the region. Did you get that? The United States is now going to be sending additional military forces to the Middle East. It's not clear exactly how many just yet, but Austin did say that he's now placing troops on prepare to deploy orders. That's in addition to the existing 2,000 U.S. troops who are already assigned to a heightened state of readiness for potential deployment. The U.S. is also moving the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower aircraft carrier to support this mission. Now, of course, it's debatable how much of an escalation this is for the U.S. military, but it's a bit ironic that the Biden administration withdrew key defense systems from the Middle East, 2 years ago. It was done under claims that tensions with Iran were cooling. Keep in mind that Biden's unfreezing of $6 billion for Iran recently before the attacks was also done with the allegations that tensions in the region were cooling. And now we have Iran going right back to the sponsoring of attacks on U.S. forces and its allies. Now, back in 2021, going a little back in time, shortly after Biden came into office, one of his first moves was to withdraw key defense systems from the Middle East. That happened right alongside the botched U.S. troop withdrawal from Afghanistan. But while Afghanistan got most of the attention, The other pullouts were significant as well. As The Hill reported at the time, Biden withdrew 8 Patriot anti-missile batteries from countries including Iraq, Kuwait, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia, and another missile defense system, again THAAD, from Saudi Arabia, as well as the hundreds of U.S. troops who operate and support those systems. Now, this was in addition as well to troop withdrawals elsewhere and the removal of other key defense systems in the region. Now, the majority of those defense systems had been moved there under the Trump administration previously, and that followed the 2019 drone attack on a Saudi oil field that was blamed on Iran. It was also in context of an Iranian missile strike on a base housing U.S. troops in Iraq, done again by Iran, which was part of Iran's retaliation from the U.S. drone strike that killed Soleimani. That was one of Iran's top generals who at the time was accused of plotting an imminent large-scale attack on U.S. troops in Iraq. Now, you might remember as well that Republicans were very angry about Biden's 2021 choice to remove those weapon systems. Senator Ted Cruz had tweeted at the time, Neville Chamberlain, fresh off giving Putin a multi-billion-dollar pipeline, now pledges to withdraw Patriot and THAAD anti-missile systems in the Middle East and facilitate Iran's conquest of the region. And here we are right now, redeploying at least some of these systems to stop Iran's conquest of the region, as it is again facilitating terrorist attacks on U.S. forces. And as this happens, the United States looks like it's playing a few different roles. Look, on one side, the U.S. is standing by and defending Israel. That includes supporting Israel as it launches strikes on Hamas in Gaza. On the other side, the U.S. is playing the role of regional peacekeeper, and it's trying to prevent the war from spreading to other countries. And on another side, the United States is playing a humanitarian role and is trying to prevent the killing of civilians as much as possible. Part of this has included delaying Israel's ground offensive to get civilians off the battlefield. But it's also being realistic that this may not be entirely possible. White House Press Secretary John Kirby said that this is a war, and regardless of U.S. efforts to ensure otherwise, civilians are going to be caught up in it. Watch.
This is war. It is combat. It is bloody. It is ugly, and it's going to be messy. And innocent civilians are going to be hurt going forward. I wish I could tell you something different. I wish that wasn't going to happen, but it is going to happen, and that doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it dismissible. It doesn't mean that we aren't going to still express concerns about that and do everything we can to help the Israelis do everything they can to minimize it. But that's unfortunately the nature of conflict.
This being said, though, Iran represents a whole other piece to the problem. Iran is the force behind many of the terrorist groups and other regional threats. Secretary of State Antony Blinken had this to say at a recent United Nations meeting. Watch.
Now, it is no secret to anyone in this room or on this council that for years, Iran has supported Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and other groups that continue to carry out attacks on Israel. Iranian leaders have routinely threatened to wipe Israel off the map. In recent weeks, Iran's proxies have repeatedly attacked U.S. personnel in Iraq and Syria, whose mission is to prevent ISIS from renewing its rampage. So, let me say this before this council, and let me say what we've consistently said to Iranian officials through other channels. The United States does not seek conflict with Iran. We do not want this war to widen. But if Iran or its proxies attack U.S. personnel anywhere, make no mistake, we will defend our people, we will defend our security, swiftly and decisively.
Now, you getting that? Iran is behind all the key terror groups involved in this conflict. That includes Hamas, and that includes the groups behind the recent attacks on U.S. forces. Blinken is saying that if Iran attacks U.S. forces, that the United States will retaliate. The big question now, again, given that some smaller attacks have now in fact happened, is what the threshold for a U.S. counterattack is going to be. Now, it's possible that the current U.S. response to bolster its forces and defenses in the region and to call out Iran directly, maybe that's the current limit to all this, but we're going to have to wait and see. Well, folks, this is it for YouTube. For the rest of the episode, come join us on Epoch TV. We're going to have Dinesh D'Souza on. We have a great discussion about his new film called Police State. And we're going to go into a lot of what we're hearing about, let's say weaponization of justice, two-tiered legal systems. Is it really just about J6? Is it about the other topics we can't even talk about on YouTube without having them censor us? And why do they censor us for that matter? It's going to be a great discussion. Don't miss it. And again, that's on Epoch TV, EpochTV.com. Come and join us for that, and I'll see you there.